Hi, my name is Tom Cooper. I'm a faculty member at Memorial University. I'm a professor of strategy there, and I'm also a business advisor and consultant.
Hi there, I'm Caron Hawco of the Caron Hawco Group. I'm an independent consultant and a collaborator with Dr. Tom Cooper, that is, on this project. And happy to be here today in front of our colleagues, Noya, Nia, and potentially Tekanel as well, and of course the oil and gas industry. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you find this an interesting presentation today.
We're very pleased to be able today to present our findings of our report entitled Identifying Regulatory and Support Ecosystem Initiatives from Leading Jurisdictions Supporting Clean Technology Innovation in the Offshore Oil and Gas Industry. Both Caron and myself will be presenting today, but we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Rystad Energy, who is a significant contributor to the report and is one of our co-authors. The focus of this study was basically on 5 jurisdictions. And what we wanted to do is trying to establish what are some of the key success factors, what are some of the real lessons learned that we can get from other jurisdictions in looking at clean technology and transitioning that into the Newfoundland and Labrador oil and gas industry. We looked at Norway, the Gulf of Mexico, Alberta, Australia, United Kingdom. What we were trying to do, once again, was to gain an understanding of what deliberate interventions related to clean tech were made to foster innovation, attract investment, diversify the supply chain, and enhance long-term environmental performance. We focused on identifying gaps and opportunities as they related to here in Newfoundland and Labrador, and understand the possible approaches to support clean technology development and application within offshore oil and gas. We did a substantial literature review, both in terms of the academic published material as well as consulting reports. We did close to probably 50 interviews across the different jurisdictions, and it was a very, very thorough study and we was very participative as well, talking to local stakeholders around how do we transition this clean technology development into the local Newfoundland Labrador offshore oil and gas industry. In terms of the indicators of success, we basically identified 6, which is good regulation and policy, a strong R&D framework, substantial innovation funding, strong supply chains, ensuring international competitiveness, and a robust innovation ecosystem. And we'll be going through some of those indicators of success that we found throughout this presentation.
So when you look at the different jurisdictions, we wanted to see where the trends were and what were those success indicators across the jurisdictions. So what we're seeing in most of these jurisdictions, not necessarily all, but the ones that are really progressive and really taking a leadership position when it comes to the evolution of their clean technology sectors, is you're seeing a significant major investments in large industrial projects. We're seeing huge collaborations in, say, for example, in the UK and Norway, you're seeing significant carbon capture projects, for example. You also see is established very strong research and development priorities set at a regional or at a national level. And you're seeing strong collaboration in the R&D ecosystem in all these jurisdictions. There's also these consistent, significant streams of innovation funding helping to drive innovation and collaboration in the marketplaces. The supply chain is heavily engaged. Once again, collaboration is a fundamental piece that's driving a lot of the clean tech innovation in these jurisdictions. A lot of supports around supply chain engagement and innovation and support mechanisms are in place. And it's also with an eye on export and internationalization. So it's beyond just building the technology and keeping it local. It is really around the full scope of innovation, going from, I'm going to use the term cradle to commercialization and getting it out to market, and looking at export and significant supports across the whole innovation ecosystem. You're also seeing incentives, so policies and regulations, the carrot and the stick, to really incentivize behaviors in the ecosystem that are facilitating stronger clean technologies. There's a disincentives, going back to the stick. So you're seeing regulations that are encouraging the phasing out of behaviors. And when the word negative behaviors is not necessarily a great choice of words there, but it is around the phasing out of older methods of, say, energy generation, for example, and incentivizing the adoption of new technologies going forward. The ecosystems are very strong in these jurisdictions. You're seeing lots of demonstration facilities, innovation centers, tech parks, areas to really foster collaboration between academia, between government, the supply chain, and industry. And that collaboration is supported and in times actually also tracked. So there's actually a measurement system to ensure that collaboration is happening in these jurisdictions.
As Caron mentioned, there's both push, pull, carrot, stick, however which you want to call it, policies that we saw very much in all the jurisdictions. Push policies drive new ideas. Pull policies stimulate markets. There's also growth policies, which we thought were so incredibly important in terms of developing marketable products through grants, loans, and growth capitals. But overall, in the jurisdictions that we saw that were really successful, it was really kind of a focus on strengthening policies as well, around clusters, incubators, and exchanges. And moreover, as we saw with the TRL life cycle in our study, going from R&D to validation to commercialization was a really important concept to drive this transition and to see in other jurisdictions where there's been success. The jurisdictional findings is very much detailed in the report. Where we found when we benchmarked Newfoundland Labrador against the other jurisdictions reviewed, including Alberta, Norway, United Kingdom, the Northwest Territory, and the Gulf of Mexico, is that for the most part, we weren't as competitive as we would like to be. When we look at economic positioning, regulation policy, R&D framework, where we found once again is that there's a lot of room for improvement. We do have some things that are going on in terms of the innovation ecosystem. We're maybe more competitive than, say, for the Gulf of Mexico. But when we looked at the real kind of or the jurisdictions where we found where there was really interesting things going on, including the United Kingdom, Norway in particular, around economic position regulation and R&D framework. And even in Alberta, there's some really, really interesting things, some really interesting policies, some really interesting initiatives that we in Newfoundland Labrador can take on and use that to grow the industry here.
Tom, if you don't mind, you wouldn't just go back for a second. I was going to point something out because in Newfoundland and Labrador, there's always this pull or this drive to compare ourselves to Norway. And we also work with Norwegian consultants on this. So in my opinion, as we got deeper into this, I found it really interesting. So my personal opinion, I started to really gravitate towards the UK. And from a cultural perspective, in terms of how the regulators and governments are working, and even because they have more of a private sector, public sector, a collaboration even in the finance side of things, that I thought that was really interesting and something that we can really get closer to and learn more about.
Definitely. The other key thing we were asked to look at was jurisdictional carbon management. And ultimately, there is no simple answer to this. Obviously, there's different things going around the world. Ultimately, this was an area where we encouraged further research to go on to come up with a really strong policy for Newfoundland Labrador. But there's interesting things going on in each of the jurisdictions. And it's an area we think of possibility of really helping, first of all, the sector, but also opening up, some new opportunities here in the province as well.
And I'm going to add something to that as well. This is a time and a place. The one thing that I will tell you is that we were being chased by policy change. This report and our recommendations started to change because new information was coming in on a daily basis. And even since this time, the Canadian government is actually now up for consultation around a carbon offset program, for example, and new initiatives. So please keep in mind that this is a time and a place where the end of 2020, where we really brought this report together. So just keep that in mind. If you see things that are not 100% accurate today at the spring of 2021, it's because of the dynamic nature around carbon management globally. So I think one of the things that, this is not an either or, and this is a message that we're hearing from both industry and governments and regulators around the world. So it's not about just totally moving away from oil and gas and then going to the use of clean technologies and renewables, for example. This is a global play There are trillions of investment dollars being put into this, and it really is around bringing the strength of the energy sector and looking at the future in terms of energy transition and where we're going to go globally. And there is a global demand for action. Regulators around the world, the climate change is in front of us today. We hear about it every day. But there's also, there's projections around hydrocarbon use, and there will be a decline over years around this. Customers are turning. Investors are turning to cleaner transitions as well, hesitant to finance oil and gas operations. Jurisdictions are shifting in terms of where they see carbon management and where they see their energy systems going. And there's a significant increase in innovation and startups globally. But ultimately, it's really around, and I look at what's going on around the world, there's trillions of dollars at play. And part of the thing that we want to point out today is, like, where is Newfoundland and Labrador in this energy transition? How will we take advantage of the strength we have as a result of building a strong energy sector here, both in the renewables and the oil and gas side? And where do we go forward based on some of the learnings and what can we take from this? But ultimately it is around the $1 trillion play that's happening at a global level.
So one of the key things that Rystad Energy contributed to the report was benchmarking Newfoundland and Labrador according to competency bases, emissions intensity, as well as the economics. The competitiveness that they concluded, and we concluded as a research team, of Newfoundland and Labrador as an oil basin is under pressure, both in terms of being a maturing basin with increasing lifting costs, being dependent on either new or clean volumes of large-scale electrification on a per barrel basis, as well as the Cleantech ecosystem will need to be designed towards that dual challenge of reducing both emissions and cost to maintain a competitive low-cost basin.
Tom, I wouldn't mind just going back to that one as well. Just a couple of points that I found really interesting here is that much of our local supply chain is really driven around maintenance and operations. So that's a really important piece there. High logistical costs. And also in terms of the number of engineers we have per barrel is fairly low based on other jurisdictions. But it's interesting, Norway also has a fairly low number of engineers per barrel as well. So these are important pieces of information and data points as we look and move forward in terms of how we really optimize our oil and gas industry here to energy transition. So when you look at Newfoundland and Labrador, and this is high level analysis based on the trends that we saw and some of the areas that we should really take a look at going forward. And the idea is really to be impartial and looking at as it is at that time and place. And it's not meant to point out flaws in any one particular organization or group. It really is around how can we learn from other places and apply some of these learnings. So some of the economic position of Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, the economy has been struggling over the last number of years. There's a steep decline in production is forecasted in the oil and gas industry. The pace of exploration has been historically low, although forecasted to improve. Hopefully after we get from this COVID environment, we'll start to see an increase in exploration. And we're a branch office. We don't have a lot of global organizations. So that means a lot of the innovation is driven from, say, for example, oil and gas operators' head offices, be that in Oslo, be that in Houston. We don't have these decision makers that are based in Newfoundland and Labrador, which can really limit our economic position and innovation. Regulation and policy here has historically been fairly political, highly political. Regulations are old and very slow to change, and that's based on a number of factors. Carbon targets, while we do have ambitions around net zero, the roadmap to how we're going to get there is still yet to be decided. So that clarity really does need to be defined. Many of the other jurisdictions, their regulators focus on maximizing the value of the hydrocarbon resources. Our regulators don't tend to focus on that, and it's a gap in terms of how you monetize your resources and what drives your regulatory environment. We have been and are still late movers when it comes to carbon capture and the use of hydrogen and looking at opportunities in these spaces. And a collaboration, there are a few formal forums for collaboration. While I think it's getting better, particularly between the industry associations, there isn't that formal organization that drives this collaboration, particularly around research and development. You're not seeing all players at the table looking at what are the priorities for us, for our offshore, or for our energy ecosystem, and then how do we move innovation in that direction. R&D in Newfoundland tends to be driven by the oil and gas operators and the priorities they have under the Atlantic Accord. Once again, limited collaboration. There's no central leading organization or accountability framework. Other jurisdictions have this in place. And as I just mentioned, the priorities are not based on provincial or an industry strategy or a known industry strategy. So that lack of understanding and collaboration and where the priorities are is not well known. Innovation funding, something that really needs to be pointed out is that the Canadian government is investing significantly around climate tech and in innovation. However, what we're seeing in Newfoundland and Labrador is low participation rates. We're not seeing companies in Newfoundland actually applying for some of this funding. And often that's based on the revenue thresholds are so high for many of the small to medium-sized companies in Newfoundland and Labrador that they're unable to compete. So these thresholds, or the other pieces as well, and we started to see is that companies aren't actually that aware of these funding pots as well. So this is a gap that we know in our recommendations that we're really looking at. So as a result, we're seeing limited financial support across the innovation life cycle. And that's from TRL 1 to 7. There are areas where we invest a lot more, say in the startup place, but across the full ecosystem, it's fairly limited, and you don't see that whole cradle to commercialization drive in terms of funding or professional supports. And so there's the industry lead around Cleantech. That's still not defined here as well. So you've got great organizations that are collaborating here, but there isn't one organization leading energy transition and bringing that collaboration together. What we do have going, though, is a very strong startup community. We've got a lot of tech starting to really take off in Newfoundland and Labrador. We've also got significant big project expertise. When you look at the mega projects that have been successfully driven from Newfoundland and Labrador, be it Hebron, Hibernia, Terra Nova, these are global projects that have, as a result, built quite a strong ecosystem when it comes to project management, supply chain collaborations. It's getting better, but there's a long road to go in terms of facilitating even more collaboration across the sectors. For example, digitalization, we're now seeing NOIA and TechNL doing collaborative projects together around digital oil and gas, or just digital growth in our economy in general. Seeing that starting to happen, which is a really good sign. National clusters, this is really interesting because we see a lot of cluster development in, say, for example, UK and Norway. And the questions that we had from these two jurisdictions is that while you have the Ocean Supercluster, which is doing great work and is really we're really starting to see how that it can drive innovation and drive new R&D funding in the ecosystem. It's very top heavy, it's Canadian oriented. And then the other jurisdictions, they also have, localized regional clusters, and that cluster development framework really fostering collaboration. One word was told was coopetition. So they're competing, but they're also cooperating at the regional lower levels of society. I shouldn't say lower, but regional levels of society. That's not happening here. We do have export support driven by primarily the government of Canada and some Newfoundland and Labrador support, but not at the same levels as you're seeing in other jurisdictions. Much more of a larger export orientation and full support. We do have significant expertise when it comes to export and ocean tech and remote sensing and other types of ocean-related technologies that really is a niche and very strong from Newfoundland and Labrador and quite unique. We're a global leader when it comes to cold ocean, marine operations, Arctic operations. What's happening, what we're seeing in other jurisdictions is that support not being, well, there's still going to be what I call generic or across the board support, but you're also seeing them now pick winners. Who are the strong players in your economies, those industrial players that can really use significant support? So picking of winners to go to, the one word you hear sometimes is like around, we're going to build unicorns. And so you're seeing a lot more of that. the innovation ecosystems are also stronger. But in Newfoundland and Labrador, we do have, 40 research facilities around Arctic innovation, ocean innovation, but we need more in terms of innovations, tech park. And actually in the middle of while we were doing this, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador announced support with TechNL to develop an innovation center. More cluster collaboration, support across the full TRL lifecycle. So when you're coming out of one area, you've got support, be professional and funding support to help you get to the next level. And then we don't have, and this is where we see the valley of death in the innovation lifecycle, is around limited testing, piloting, and demonstration projects and plants here offshore Newfoundland and Labrador. So innovations that are being built here are often not demonstrated. They often find it hard to find demonstration projects in an offshore environment.
So throughout the rest of this presentation, we're going to try and maybe kind of focus on a couple of the amazing things that Caron just went through. But I think one of the first key things that we have to look at is that the local supplier industry is just not right-sized or focused to take on this challenge alone. This is a global opportunity. It's a global industry. If we focus on local, we're going to miss the opportunity. And so we've been focused up to this point as an industry on maintenance and operations, but that need for interregional, inter-country collaboration is so important. And the support system should not be prohibited developing more clean tech opportunities. So that becomes really, really important.
I wouldn't mind even pointing something out. When I see what's going on, say in the UK, and you see billions of dollars and into like hydrogen clusters and hubs and so forth, and innovation hubs, in the back of my head as a consultant, I go, where's our spot in this? Where does Newfoundland and Labrador fit into this equation? Because we know that there's going to be talent challenges and capacity challenges to meet these ambitions. So then what is the strategy we have, and how do we fit into this global as well as some of these national initiatives, and how do we go forward? So I guess a couple of things that we need to point out, because you're not comparing apples to apples when you're looking at, say, the UK. We're a province, not a nation. We are part of a federation. So we're limited in terms of our authority to set specific policies. We are highly reliant on commodities in the mining sector and the oil and gas sector. So that brings some challenges in terms of stability around the fluctuation of commodity markets. We're a small province with limited influence on national policies. So even when we talked about national funding initiatives, as a small province, our companies tend to be small as well. So there are some limitations around how we can influence at many different levels. And local decision-making, say with oil and gas companies, even mining and the other big industrial developments that we have here, or industrial companies here, we're a branch office. We don't have that centralized decision-making authority here. And that means when it comes to innovation and demonstration projects and so forth, there are limitations about what we can do at a local level. And then, right, the technology experts when it comes to sort of repeating myself there, but what's happening is because the innovation centers of big global organizations are not located in Newfoundland, we don't have access, and the supply chain and the innovators and the startups don't have access to head office decision makers. So you don't really know where the priorities are at a global level. But it's also, we don't have access to people to help give feedback to or integrate our technologies and our innovations. And then it really is negatively impacting our ability and the speed for commercialization, because we're not getting access to end users and the purchasers. And who are the purchasers in this space? And then there are some real problems that we have at a provincial level that can be addressed. One is around chronic systemic inertia, and there's limited institutional capacity to move fast track changes. For example, our regulations take a very long time to make any changes at all. Setting strategic policies, bringing collaboration, there's just a lack of speed and intensity. This is a fast moving machine at a global level, and we need more cross-sector collaboration. Regulatory changes are being made at a snail's pace. We're lagging behind when it comes to climate change in terms of regulations and enforcement, those carrots and those sticks, and really clearly articulating what those are. And then there's no forum for accountability. If you are in the energy transition space, who is actually leading that strategy right now to move us in the right direction? And that's not just pointing at governments, that's actually looking at the whole ecosystem and saying, there's a gap here. How do we maximize our energy resources, our hydrocarbon resources, but also leading towards energy transition and looking where the opportunities are for the province?
There is opportunities. Newfoundland Labrador is unique, and that uniqueness is going to potentially help favor clean tech development and potentially make it an attractive testing ground, proof of concept, shall we say, for international clean tech development. We do have topside flexibility. We have a really, really interesting logistics intensive industry, which is one of the things that Rystad pointed out to us in terms of maybe one of those kind of critical success factors that we could apply here in Newfoundland Labrador to the overall clean tech sector. Our oil fields are also unique, but one of the key things is that we got Muskrat Falls, and that clean energy access from Muskrat Falls could be a real potential differentiator in terms of driving clean tech opportunities in the offshore oil and gas industry here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Also here, obviously, we have strong characteristics to support energy transition. And this is an energy transition that's happening globally. Caron has mentioned our expertise and capacity in remote sensing and ocean technology. We have strong university and research institutions, burgeoning startups, big project expertise, but we're also located between the US and Europe. And we have access to those markets. We know people in the Gulf of Mexico. We know people who in Norway and in the UK. And as Caron said at the beginning of the presentation, this knowledge, this expertise that we've been able to develop over the last 30, 40 years is going to really put us in a great position to take advantage of some of these opportunities. And once again, Muskrat Falls having the potential to offer tremendous opportunities, as the province will soon be the only jurisdiction in North America with 100% renewable energy. Technology competence, capacity, financial investments are going to be needed. We need to leverage significant technical strengths and industrial capacity, and we need to foster growth and diversification to really take advantage of the clean tech opportunities. And we go into much more detail on this within the report. So ultimately, that comes to a bunch of recommendations. And our recommendations in the report, we've classified by quick wins in terms of next 6 to 12 months, within medium term in 12 to 24 months, and longer term 24 to 36 months.
Sure. And, when you look at just in terms of regulatory and policy, it's really around, we need an organizational capacity, collaboration to support the province's energy transition, and even about how we're going to compete at a global level around energy transition and the growth of our clean tech community here. We need a roadmap in terms of how we are going to meet those emission reduction targets. More implementation around and clear guidelines and strategy around this. We need more collaboration in our ecosystem from a regulatory perspective, and we need to be able to be more efficient, more nimble to the marketplace, helping innovations become faster and more easily applied for offshore operations, for example. If a regulator can actually, and it's not only the regulator, but if we, from a government or regulatory perspective, can identify innovations that we can fast track and then make sure the regulations will line up with those types of data sets, that will really help the innovation ecosystem grow at a faster pace. And having an overarching research and development entity of some sort, defining what our policy priorities are going to be at a provincial level and fitting into a national level, there needs to be a consistent, coordinated, professionalized, collaborative framework to move R&D for the province that is very strategic and well-defined.
Innovation ecosystem is so important. Where we looked at other jurisdictions, we saw really, really strong innovation ecosystems around clean technology. If there's one thing that we could take from this report, this needs to be in place in order for success. The second thing that we really need in place is good innovation financing, whether it's from the push, pull, growth, strengthen policies, the importance of capital and financing and funding and financing opportunities, both at a local level as well as bringing that collaboration and co-opetition is incredibly important. And in the report, we give some really specific examples, whether it's through green bonds or it's in terms of carbon reduction measures to once again help drive the sector.
And then looking at our digital growth from the oil and gas and energy sector perspective, more collaboration, more projects, an understanding of where the industry is going, helping to reduce costs, improve efficiencies, reducing carbon emissions, encouraging more collaboration, and also looking at international competitiveness, both from an outbound perspective, bringing our companies to at a global level, more export support, behaving in a larger manner. Sometimes we tend to play it fairly small when we look at export, being much more collaborative and going at a larger pace. And also looking at international financial investments and how we have a strategy in place and what strategy is that to attract investors coming into the province to build on our on this opportunity, particularly looking at that oil and gas experience that we have, Muskrat Falls, and other types of opportunities that could be monetized further.
So thank you for the opportunity to work on this important project. And for me, there was really three key takeaways. Number one, the world is changing. This sector, offshore oil and gas, is going under significant change. Energy transition is happening. Newfoundland and Labrador has to position itself to take advantage of this transition, or we're going to get left behind. Number two, finance, money, investors. There's so much money in this sector. And moreover, what investors and insurers and people in the financial sector want, they want this transition. They need this transition. And moreover, this transition, once again, is going to be happening. And thirdly, we need a really strong, robust policy system to make sure that we can capitalize upon these opportunities and minimize the downside risk.
Absolutely. We heard from leaders in Newfoundland and Labrador the need for collaboration, the need for coordination and leadership. We can be an energy hub. There is a place for us in this. We've got a tremendous amount of strengths, but there are struggles and there are frustrations. So then what is the next step in this? And hopefully this can identify some key opportunities for revision, for growth, and for, and I'm going to use the word again, collaboration, because it's fundamental across the board that we can come together to meet the meet our own carbon ambitions, but also contribute to a significant economic opportunity as well as something that's vital for the planet going forward. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate your time. And we thank Nia and Noya and the whole committee for the opportunity to do a deep dive into this important study. And hopefully we can actually see how we can work this now going forward.